Hi, this is Nikita Petrov. I'm speaking to you from a field in the Ostrov region in the Pskov Oblast in Russia. And all of that is very appropriate because the conversation you're about to hear is about Russia. I'm talking to Gary Lachman, he's been on the show before. We talked about his previous book, Dark Star Rising, which deals with, he looks at this resurgence of occult or magical thinking in politics in Russia and in the US. Ideas about like Kek, the god of chaos, who is associated with Pepe the Frog, who is in turn associated with Donald Trump. And now he's published a new book called The Return of Holy Russia, and it's kind of an offshoot of that previous one. So he started writing about Russia in Dark Star Rising, and then it seems like he kind of couldn't stop and went down the rabbit hole of just learning about Russia and Russian history and the history of Russian thought and Russian thought about Russia. And he produced this volume, this long and fascinating book. It's a page turner because it's just filled with strange and kind of larger than life characters and stories and strange ideas that I think some of them are, really compelling. In any case, they're quite interesting. So the book is great and the conversation was a lot of fun. Obviously, it's more special for me, maybe, right? Because the reason it's special to me is because the book is kind of about me. It's about this character of the Russian man and the Russian soul. And I am a Russian man with a Russian soul. But on the other hand, I kind of know the territory, and for you, there might be a lot of new, interesting ideas here. And maybe there's significance, kind of political significance to it too, because we need to figure out what relationship Russia has to the rest of the world, and that is something that both Russians and people outside of Russia could use, figuring that out. So without further ado, this is my conversation with Gary Lachman. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you buy his book too, and I also hope that you subscribe to my newsletter at psychopolitica.com, where I think I'll publish a little something based on this conversation. I'm working on this sketch for kind of like an alternative cover for the book. So this is it. I'll talk to you later. Bye. The first thing I wanted to do is to say thank you for this book, because it is a great book. I think anybody who is curious about Russia or even just a generally curious person would appreciate it because, as I say, it's packed with fascinating stories of these different characters, many of whom are larger than life, and the stories themselves are really interesting, and it's all woven together into this big narrative of what Russia is. And there's value to this that you're trying to extract from the Russian story that would be worthwhile for people outside of the country and all that. So I highly recommend it to anybody listening. But for me personally, it's a bit of a different story because I'm Russian, I'm in Russia. And as you correctly write in the book, the relationship between Russians and Russia is not an easy one. There's a lot of anxiety connected to it, whether we're good guys or bad guys, whether there are redeeming qualities to all the suffering or complications that the country has gone through, whether we matter at all, and all that kind of stuff. And it really helps, in my life, it really helped knowing people from outside the country to try to think about it and talk about and explain what Russia is to them, and by doing so, explain it to myself. And reading your book gave me a similar kind of feeling. Like, it's not exactly a conversation, it's you telling me what you found rather than me trying to explain it to you. But it gave me a good feeling. I think you get it, and I was happy to see your perspective, and your tone of voice and your way of approaching the topic is also, I'm grateful for that. As you say in the beginning of the book, I suppose it's like one of the impetus for writing the book was that you saw how
some other writers reacted to that list of philosophers that was on a suggestion list for governors that was sent from the administration of the president. And that was the reaction that many Western writers had was simplistic and kind of making it worse than not giving it appreciative kind of attention. So so there's that. Thank you for writing this.
Well, absolutely my pleasure, Nikita, and thank you for having me on again. But well, that was really sort of the impetus for the book. What you just said was, I mean, I should make clear, I'm not a Russian scholar. I've kind of become one by writing the book. I mean, but I'm not a Russian scholar. I don't have any degrees. I don't speak Russian. I've never been. But I did read some of the people that was on these reading lists, specifically Nikolai Berdyaev and Vladimir Soloviev. I didn't know Ivan Ilyan's work at all, so I wasn't familiar with that. But I just thought, as you said, the reaction from some Western critics and journalists to it, you can't expect them to be too subtle, but I just thought it was very, well, I thought it was very severe, and I also was very ignorant in some ways, because they tried to present Berdyaev and Soloviev as these very pro-nationalist, what we would call exceptionalist sort of visionaries for Russia's destiny and all that. And yes, it's true. I mean, this notion of Russia having some, if not messianic, certainly a very significant role to play in world events or world history 100 years ago, before the Bolshevik revolution. This was something that quite a few people talked about, and in the West as well. I mean, I started out by saying that, people like Rudolf Steiner and Hermann Hesse and Oswald Spengler and others. I mean, they were non-Russians somehow. But in any case, that's what sort of said, oh, well, this is actually kind of wrong, and I thought that was, I mean, whatever the Russian government's motives for, sending these reading lists out, I think these people are, worth knowing and reading and worth understanding what they're saying, not just rejecting it. And then, I mean, what you said, yeah, it's just, once I started sort of looking into it, because I didn't know much about Russian history. I mean, aside from around the time of the revolution, let's say Rasputin and all that sort of thing, I just became fascinated with it. And I didn't start out wanting to write a history of Russia. And I just thought, what am I doing here? It's like, I'm writing a history of Russia. I was like, well, they're just the stories and this narrative. And I just learned as I went. And I just, that's why I say I'm not an expert, but I know a damn sight more about Russia now than I ever did. And it was all fascinating. And it is full of these larger than life characters and these great struggles of power and all that. So I just was captivated by it. And then I just went on.
Did you come to any kind of a conclusion about the connection between the actual Russian state now and these ideas that, in that case, like the administration of the president referenced, and Putin quoted some of these people in some of his speeches? Did you personally come out with a conclusion whether he or they actually care about this stuff, or actually put thought in it, or use it for propaganda reasons?
It's not like a study of Putin per se. I mean, right. He's sort of the trigger for doing it, and then of course he's in there. I mean, he's a politician, obviously, and so politicians are strategists and tacticians, and first job of a politician is to stay in power, and he seems to be very good at that. But at the same time, I did get the impression that, again, and this is something I think people that are a bit in sympathy to some degree with Russia, and we have to say, there's practically everyone I talk to, quite a few doing these interviews. I mean, they can't get away from Russia as the USSR. Right. So whenever I say Russia, they think USSR, and I say, well, it's kind of like whenever you say Germany, you mean the Nazis, and enough time has passed, and maybe in the eyes of other nations, Germany's done enough good things since then to be kind of let back in the club, but we still think, oh no, Russia, they're the evil empire or something like that. But in any case, so I just had, you say, well, actually, no, that's a relatively short period in 1,000-year, history, at least 1,000 years. So, but just saying that I don't know. I just get the impression that sort of in general there's a more bookish literary kind of sense to I mean, Trump, if he suggests any books to read, they'd be his own books about, the art of the deal.
Trump is a pretty low bar, though, in that particular respect.
Well, yeah, I know. I'm sure. You can trip over the goalpost. But I just mean in the sense that it just intrigued me that any world leader was offering not only philosophy, but difficult philosophers that are dealing with, spiritual issues, not like the latest. I don't know if there's any philosopher. I guess some political philosophers maybe in the West are, brought in. But these are issues about what we consider existential issues about the meaning of life and the meaning of history and where is everything going and all of this sort of and the loss of the soul in the modern world and so that was the concern of these philosophers 100 years ago. And it seems that for whatever reason that seems to be kind of the mantle that Putin seems to be adopting, not only on himself, but for Russia standing in the world. It's a country now that's embracing these things. I mean, how much he himself really believes in it, I don't know. It's kind of like asking, how much did Mick Jagger really believe in black magic and Satanism? When it's like, well, he was reading the books and, everybody was talking about it, but it was a tactic. And then after a while, he dropped out of it. So I don't know. But I mean, that shouldn't stop us from reading them and trying to understand, because the thing I tried to say at the end of the book is I think these thinkers had something to offer to the West 100 years ago when they were stopped by the Bolsheviks. And now they're back around and we can still learn something from what they had to offer.
When going through, I was kind of jumping back and forth through the book to get a more whole idea of what it's about before the interview. At the end, you're in the conclusion, you're kind of saying it, in a sense, it doesn't matter whether Putin reads them or not. And it made me just an association with in my head appear that I want to share with you. There's an idea that one of my favorite kind of elements of the modern, I call it like Russian political mythology or something, meaning it's a thing that an idea, a version of which you can hear from a taxi driver here, a person you meet at the bar there, and mostly it's done jokingly, but then occasionally you meet a person who actually believes in some version of this idea, and it's the idea that Putin does not even exist. There are versions of it. There's like either there are doubles of Putin and the original Putin is dead and it's all an act, or there are like androids and different models of Putin that are sent for different reasons, like depending on what the issue of the day is, a different kind of robot will address it. And I think many of these, you could trace some of these ideas to a book written by Viktor Pelevin in the, I think it was late 90s, in the Russian version it's called Generation P, the premise of which is all of the politicians and everything that you see in the news is all CGI graphics created by like the low level of a person working in this system would be advertiser, and then as you climb further,
Surkov, right? Vladislav Surkov.
Right, and Surkov is that kind of a person, yeah.
Well, I mean, the thing, you what were you saying earlier? Oh, about you're saying about the Putin doesn't really exist. That was because you get somebody have a bus campaign. Because I don't know if you know here, people like Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens, these atheists, they had a campaign with the buses. God probably doesn't exist. So
so just carry on. Yeah, I've seen graffitis like that with Putin is an illusion or Putin is a mass psychosis.
Well, he's a very, very good one. He's been able to maintain his illusory reality for quite some time.
Right. So in any case, yeah, that is an important idea to me because you see it expressed in a bunch of different ways in modern Russian culture, and that says to me that it's a part of how Russians today think about power. But let's go back to these thinkers, not just the three mentioned in the list, but over the course of the book, you look at many Russian thinkers, and you do find some of the like common traits. And you mentioned one that troubled those people who wrote the reviews in English, the idea of Russian exceptionalism. There's a version of it that is my favorite. Again, I have a kind of affinity to ideas that so outlandish that I'm not like scared that they're gonna trick me into believing them wholeheartedly.
Right.
And then what happens is I find myself a year down the road talking about this idea. They get around my defenses.
Slowly infected you. Right.
Yeah. So it's one of those cosmists. I forget who exactly that is. It must have been Fyodorov who made the case. He said that Russia is supposed to become the global civilization, the planetary civilization, because the relationship of Russians to Russia is similar to the relationship of humankind to the cosmos, meaning it's just this vast expanse. You're gonna try to civilize it and build things there, but eventually it's just gonna swallow you probably. It's this it's not inhabited yet, and it's not at all clear whether you can inhabit this huge expanse. So that's an idea that a version of that idea that I can kind of entertain just because I find it interesting, funny. There are qualities to it that are endearing to me. But what do you make of how would you phrase the version of this like exceptionalism that you see in different thinkers?
Well, I mean, there's exceptionalism, I guess, as I guess it's narrow or a particularly political or socio-political interpretation now that your nation is somehow different than all of the nations, but I mean, there's that, but it's also America has that too. There's the Great Destiny of America. They went to the east to the west coast, and it's obvious that this is our destiny and all of that. And Reagan was talking about that sort of stuff in the '80s. So, but I think with the. I mean, talking about the cosmos, yeah. I mean, there is this tendency for these vast ideas, these huge universal ideas, and excuse me, in a way, it might be able to understand it in a neat little formula that the German philosopher Oswald Spengler, he's not on everyone's book list these days, but they could be. I mean, he wrote The Decline of the West, and he might be a bit more spot on now than he was 100 years ago.
It's one of those. The decline of the West and the term the Russian soul are things that a big portion of Russians, when you just mention it, scoff. Like I was reading your book and I was about to tell my girlfriend that I just found it interesting that from the early pages you start using the term the Russian soul, where normally maybe with a different culture you would say character or mentality. Right. And I couldn't even get to that point because the minute I mentioned the Russian soul, she just went with the Russian soul again. Instead of fixing the road or doing something real in this world, there's just this talking.
Well, no, I can understand. I mean, I try at different points to say, I'm sorry if this is cliched and all that, but, give me a break. But, well, I mean, I'll quickly get through this then. So Spengler basically says the difference between the Russian character and the Westerner. Is the Westerner, if you look at the Gothic church, it's this soaring spire, stretching out into space, and it's the Western I, the ego, reaching up to heaven or God. And but according to Spengler, a lot of Russians don't do that. They look out. They look out into the horizon. I mean, I say I haven't been there, so I can't take this as a matter of fact. But I guess. Geographically that would make sense, or just psychogeographically that would make sense because you have these vast expanses of, I guess your girlfriend's going to say, oh, there's the vast expanses again and the steppes and all of that, but that's the idea. Well, I guess back in the day in America, that was the West, this way out west, we got this, so, and so there's a sense of a we, rather than just an I. And somehow that would be this cosmic kind of embrace. There's a sense of being in the world, and that that translates in a lot of ways. I mean, you talk about the cosmos. There's other ones like Vernadsky and Tsiolkovsky and Chizhevsky, and they're all talking about in different ways that humanity is not this fluke accident, happening in this mechanical universe. It's part of the same processes going on the earth, just as clouds and trees and herds of animals are. And we play this cosmic role. And, they're talking about the noosphere back before Teilhard de Chardin and all that. And so a lot of these ideas, and Vernadsky's ideas, are involved in Biosphere 2 and all of that kind of thing. And there's a weird connection between that and Bannon, because Bannon was involved in Biosphere 2, but let's not go there. So, but one of the points I try to make is it does seem to be, there is this kind of sense, and not only in these eccentric, let's say, philosophers, at least from the Western point of view, like the Cosmists, you have it in Tolstoy in War and Peace. Napoleon isn't this great man who impresses his power and dominates, it's a big word these days in the news, he dominates his will upon the people. He's a cork thrown up by the waves of history and all this. So It's this antithesis to this Western idea of this heroic individual who conquers, and it's more like, no, you're part of this huge kind of reaching out mass sort of thing.
Right, and there's this ongoing, again, throughout the centuries and up until now, battle between, or not even the battle. One of the things that you say, that as you try to describe this like Russian character, which again, I'm not holding it against you for using the Russian soul and all that stuff. I'm perfectly fine with it. I think that the problem that some people have is not that, like my girlfriend had, it's not even that it's a cliche, it's just that Russians talk about the Russian soul as well, instead of like fixing the things that you can touch. Sure. Well,
I'm sure it must be the same thing or similar to, say, somewhere in India, where the Westerners always talking about, Indian spirituality and Gandhi and all this kind of thing. And people are, well, maybe not as much today, but still, living in poverty and so on. So, sure. I mean, but again, I'm talking about, I have a lot of different sources. I mean, the phrase I do kind of use is Russian man.
Right.
I mean, there is the Russian soul, the Russian psyche. This is supposed to be a character of and all that. And of course, all this is coming through Western sources, or translations of Russian philosophers and all that. But you kind of do have it in Gogol, the troikas rolling off into the infinite spaces and into the night, and Russia, where are you? And
right.
kind of thing. So, I mean, it does, I'm sure it's loaded with cliches for a Russian reader. But I'm, just as many cliches about the French or the Germans or.
Sure. No. And I think these are cliches for a reason. They become a cliche because you see this idea expressed a bunch of times in all of this writing. I have a book on my shelf. You definitely mentioned Mamleyev, one of the later Soviet writers. He wrote a book called Russia the Eternal, which was his attempt at figuring out what Russia is and explaining this like idea of Russia, which is again a task that it's always there. Nobody ever completes it, and Russians are always kind of freaking out about whether we know what Russia is and trying to approach it. And one of the points he makes there, which I found very true, and because of that, somewhat funny, he makes this analysis of Russian patriotic poetry, so poetry about Russia. And there's a lot of that. And, as a Russian growing up here in school, you learn like the classics, you're given a certain kind of selection of those, and it's the case that in many of those, the poet would express his love towards the country, but it's always like, I love you, Russia, but it's a strange kind of love. Or the one that is quoted the most, I think, in terms of like this patriotic, like a staple of patriotic poetry is a poem by Tuchev where he says that his version of Russian exceptionalism, I suppose, is he says, Russia cannot be understood by the mind, cannot be measured by a common measure. Russia is something that you can only believe in. And so there's always this like, it's almost like the relationship to Russia is of a Russian who feels a kind of love towards it is almost like a relationship of like a troubled religious person to God or something. Like you're chasing it.
Yeah. I mean, again, from my limited perspective, that sounds pretty accurate. I mean, this Russian man idea is that it's this huge character that's able to, in her capacious soul, is able to accommodate all different oppositions and contradictions,
Right.
all these kind of things that a Westerner just would have a nervous breakdown doing, or it just. They're just not able to do that, and this was the threat that Hesse. And he didn't mean threat in some kind of a Russophobic way, but in the sense that this was on its way. The same way Nietzsche was like saying nihilism is on its way. This was on its way, and he saw it in the novels of Dostoevsky, and it was this tremendous, turbulent, primal kind of power. And Berdyaev, who's Russian, or was at least, he says the same thing. He says in this book, The Russian Idea, the Russian psyche it has this tremendous primal power, but it doesn't have form, doesn't have any, it needs a form. And so somehow, and this is something that James Billington, who's a great American historian of Russia, and he wrote this huge book that it's called The Icon and the Axe, which I plundered shamelessly. But he says in another book, he says what seems to be typical of Russian culture and art is that they take something on from somewhere else, and they take the form on from somewhere else, and then they do something to it that makes it, very, very different and almost completely new. And then so they transform it into something else. So so there is this sense that there's something vast and big and turbulent and, the prima materia kind of thing. And it somehow needs, this, what do you want to call it, logical or more masculine or something kind of form. And I guess this is the myth too, that I know, again, what I understand, what should I call it, the more Western-leaning Russians, the more progressive Russians, say, oh no, this is the old story that we had to get the Vikings come to rule us because we couldn't do it ourselves, and rather than you come and raid us every 6 months, why don't you come here? We'll put you up, we'll treat you really nice, you can protect us from the other Vikings, and then you can kind of give us some order. And Rurik and his gang, and so. I mean, is that myth? Is that real? Is that something that's used politically at different times? And I try to give some equal time to Novgorod, because that seemed to be, at least historically, a place of a more liberal or Western or whatever democratic kind of thing. And that they've always seemed to get, kind of trounced by Moscow throughout most of the history and all that. So
this is the part in your book that I haven't read thoroughly enough to really understand your take on it. But at some points in the book, you talk about the Bolshevik experiment as a thing that put an end to a lot of these trains of thoughts, because a lot of people were either killed or exiled or imprisoned, and then there's this hiatus of 70 years. At the same time, there's a way of looking at the Bolshevik experiment. Like you said, Russians take something from the outside, like Marxism, originated from Germany, and do something with it. And then, me growing up after the collapse of the Soviet Union, looking back at that story, I always felt that it quickly morphed into a version of something that was present before. There's the exceptionalism a version of it, in that there's this great mission. It's supposed to be a completely atheistic, materialistic situation, but there's an apocalyptic quality to it in that we're trying to bring an end to the existing world and the coming, classless society and all that. And there's a mummy of the main leader in the square, so there's a kind of theocratic...
In a four-dimensional cube,
right?
Designed by, I forget the architect, but Mayevich had the idea for it, and he came from theosophical ideas. So
do you see the Soviet part as a continuation of that previous thing?
Well, there's certainly, it strikes me that initially Lenin was, really trying to eliminate inwardness, eliminate this soul kind of thing, because that was just in the way. That was just something that, was stopping the revolution from taking place and all that. But then, it seemed, again, like when Stalin got into power, it did morph into something that was more like the earlier czars or like the earlier time, and also certainly by the time of the Great War or the Great Patriotic War, it wasn't the international Marxism and the steady march of towards the class of society. It was Mother Russia, and all of that. So, and Stalin became the man of steel, this kind of Superman, godlike kind of character. And there's the funny story I tell in the book. I forget who is it that talks about it, but I think what was it, after Stalin's death? Some woman in the Politburo had a dream where she said Lenin didn't like Stalin being buried next to him, and so they I don't know if it's true, but the source said that they actually moved him. So, so still this kind of, and there's all the stories about the interest in what became known as parapsychology. I guess it was psychical research back then. Gleb Bucky or Boki and Alexander Barchenko. There's this very interesting book called Red Shambhala, and it's about how Barchenko was this doctor, but he sort of, wasn't really on the list, on the register, but he was deeply interested in a variety of different esoteric practices and like Tibetan Buddhism and medicine and all this kind of stuff. And Bucky was somebody, he was the security, he was the head of security during like the terror, the purges. And then he got sickened by what was happening. I mean, he was idealist about the revolution in, sort of a real, true, way. And then he just was sickened by the carnage. And they had this strength, they came together, and that's a great story by itself, but they had this strange idea that if they could go to Tibet, they'd be able to bring back these kind of spiritual teachings that would be able to actually transform the revolution to what it should be, this kind of brotherhood, this kind of harmony among all of us, and through these spiritual practices that would, emanate. And then also that the yogis and the monks up there had what they called super science. They had some kind of fantastic way of harnessing some strange powers and energies. Nicholas Roerich was somebody else who thought this was the case. It's the kind of thing that years later turned up. There was a British writer named T. Lobsang Rampa, who wrote all these books about his previous life in Tibet. He never left sort of Devon or something, but he wrote all these. But he has this one called The Cave of the Ancients, and it's about precisely all this kind of super science and nuclear energy forces that the Tibetan yogis have. So they really believe this was true. And then there's the whole story about Nicholas Roerich, who's the great painter and mystic, and who was the inspiration for and the set designer for The Rite of Spring, Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. He wanted to set up an independent pan-Buddhist nation in Inner Mongolia, and he was trying to get the Bolsheviks, involved.
His story is, I'm not, again, educated enough to say this with confidence, but it's interesting that his story, he's coming to it through the kind of the red part of the red-white divide, right? But it seems to be similar to the Baron Jungern's situation, the white warlord, you could say.
I mean, I think I just name checked him in a footnote. I couldn't get him in, but that's an utterly fantastic story. Ungarn, who actually had this kind of army. I mean, Roerich started out as a vociferous anti-Bolshevik, and he was right. He left early on, and he wrote lots of anti-Bolshevik articles and White Russian kind of stuff. But then, what he wanted to do, because he believed in this myth of Shambhala, or at least he wanted to use the myth of Shambhala, which was this secret city or secret hidden society of civilization somewhere in the Gobi Desert or wherever it might be. But it goes back to the Kala Chakra Tantra and this Tibetan teachings. And he sort of wanted, and it talks about the return of this hero who was going to sort of inaugurate this new age and so on. And he sort of wanted to use that to set up this whole kind of thing, and he never really got around to it. But Baron Ungarn actually had, he was actually, he had his country in his hands for a while. And I mean, the story, whenever I think anyone mentions him, I just think of when he was finally caught and executed. But apparently, he took a medal that he got, some metal, and he chewed it rather than let it get into the hands of.
I haven't heard that part.
So he was. Oh yeah, this is in who is it? Osendowski's book, Beast Gods, and I forget what the other one is, which he talks about. He talks about Shambhala there as well.
Mm-hmm.
So no, there's all these kinds of things, and that went on until everyone knows into the 60s and 70s. There was all the books out about the Soviet espionage being interested in remote viewing, just like in the States, and all that. So I mean, but again, from my perspective, an American living in England. And reading books off and on about it, for years, I just always get the impression that it was somehow more out in the open, or somehow it wasn't so strange that this would be happening there. Whereas if you hear about it in the States, oh my God, I can't believe they're putting money into this there. So I don't know if that's just propaganda or, national profiling, or whether it really is the case that because of the Russian soul, they're more open to these kinds of things.
I mean, in the Soviet Union, certainly you're not supposed to entertain these ideas, but I think there is nascent in all of these iterations of the Russian identity to today's one. There is one of the qualities that you ascribe to this like Russian man, which I think is correct, is this tendency or always an attempt to unite the opposites. And the rationality with the absurd, or appreciation of the absurd, and mysticism with science and all of these things, they always somehow, like there is one of my favorite little bits of pieces about the modern Russian identity, bits of information, is there was this poll that they did asking people, there were a bunch of questions, but two of the questions on the poll were, do you consider yourself Eastern Christian, Orthodox Christian, right, the Russian branch of Christianity. And then another question was, do you believe in God? And this poll was maybe like 10 years ago or something. And 70% of people said that they are Orthodox Christian. And of those 70, 30 said they do not believe in God.
There you go.
And I mentioned
there's
this.
The rest call.
Right. And I mentioned that at a gathering of my parents' friends, so the generation above me, and I mentioned that as a curiosity and an obviously absurd kind of situation, and one of them went like, "That would be me. That describes me. I would call myself Russian Orthodox, pretty much an atheist though, and it's." And the guy is smart and educated, and can explain it in rational terms too. Give an interpretation of what it would mean. Like culturally, there's a lot that we inherited from the religious tradition, but then I personally don't have a connection to God. But there's something about this that you just see it so often and so in different versions that it does seem that it's just a quality of thought here that these things can be combined and maybe should be combined in weird ways. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that reminds me of a story about P.D. Uspensky, who's he's most known in the West as being the most articulate exponent of Gurdjieff's philosophy. But as you know, he was a very important philosopher and writer in his own right. And he comes out of the Silver Age. He was one of the people that was a frequenter of the Stray Dog Cafe with people like Bieli and Yusuf and Anna Akhmatova and all that. But he tells a story somewhere, I don't know if it's something he tells for his own life or in his novel, Strange Life of Ivan Osokin. But he and a friend, they're asked to sign something in some kind of guest book. And the one friend writes, whatever happens, always remember that, 2 + 2 = 4. And Uspensky writes the same thing, but he says, whatever happens, always remember 2 + 2 = 5 instead. So it's this kind of, it's in a way you can say it's almost, Dostoevsky in Notes from Underground, he's the Beetle man, the underground man, says, yes, after you show me how everything works out to this fantastic plan and it's all in this rational order and everything's working out to this great, a blueprint of everything, I'll go insane on purpose just to show that I'm free, just to show that I'm not just a cog in a wheel and all that. So again, Berdyaev says this, there's this kind of refusal in something in Russian psyche, character, culture, history, to accept necessity in some way, or it's a complete kind of fatalism where it's a complete kind of plunge into it. Again, this is a Russian writing in the West after being exiled from Russia by Lenin. He was on one of the philosophy steamers with so many others, and it's this idea where it's either this volcanic eruption of energy and refusal to submit to any system, or it's this kind of slavish somnolence, like Oblomov, who's takes a chapter to get out of bed and sits in front of the stove all day. So again, these kind of contradictions, and I guess the idea was back then, and maybe we can learn something from that now, that maybe in some way it's out of those contradictions that protean chaos, as Nietzsche said, the dancing star, you have chaos in yourself to give birth to a dancing star. And the chaos is fine and dandy, but it's the dancing star that you're really, going for. And, that's the idea that, maybe out of that something still can come. So I don't know. I mean, does Russia today, does it have this kind of messianic character that some people like Alexander Dugin, I get the impression I don't know if he's in the news anymore, but he's the one who sort of was having that kind of idea with the Eurasia meme and things of that sort. So I don't necessarily see it in that way, but it may, who knows the way things are going, in the world, who knows what might happen in that way. But I think we can learn something from their ideas, because they were trying to be a complement to, or to compensate for what was lacking in the West. I'm talking about the Silver Age guys again. They were trying to compensate for this, well, again, the loss of the soul in the sense, because the West had become just mechanistic and utilitarian and completely pragmatic and all of that. And that's why Dostoevsky was preferring to go mad rather than submit
do anything to. I think he actually uses in the Notes from the Underground, he talks about 2 + 2 equaling 4 and not being happy about it.
Yeah, that might be it. That might be where Ouspensky got it. But yeah. So there is this kind of, and again, Berdyaev. He's. I mean, out of all these ones, the thinkers, the philosophers, he's the one I know the most, because I was reading his books for a long time. I first came across him. Must have been back in the 70s, late 70s, after I'd read Colin Wilson, because he talks about him a bit in some of his books. I think The Outsider. He talks about Dostoevsky, and Berdyaev wrote a book about Dostoevsky, and so I was reading Dostoevsky, and I came across one of his books at the first Barnes & Noble secondhand bookshop. There was just one ages ago. There's none now. Any case, but it was like, oh, and I just read it, and then I just started reading his books, and he's one of these really fascinating characters, because he's starts out as a Marxist, but he's also a Christian, but he's really on the fringe. He's an eccentric Christian. He gets kind of excommunicated or whatever, kicked out or something the equivalent of. And then he's this existentialist who's obsessed with freedom and, is influenced by people like Jakob Böhme and, the Protestant, the mystical cobbler, the Jakob Böhme, this bohemian, cobbler who saw this glint of light on a pewter dish and sent him into this ecstasy where he was looking into the heart of nature, and has this very, he wrote these incomprehensible books in this very, strange alchemical language that he borrowed from Paracelsus. But it's about the Ungrund, this groundless freedom out of which even God comes. God isn't the ultimate source of all things. God, him or her itself is rooted in this groundlessness, So it's these ideas I found fascinating, and so a lot of his books are translated into English. So I read them for quite some time.
Have you found anybody, maybe in research in this book, more contemporary, more modern, that struck a chord with you, that you found worthwhile?
Well, I mean, I don't know. You mean like really contemporary, like today, working today? I can't say I'm up to speed with that, but I was introduced to people's work. They're not contemporary, but they become kind of contemporary. Daniel Andreev, who was the son of Leonid Andreev, who's the was going to say he was the great nihilist writer, but I don't know if you can be a great nihilist. but he's this nihilist writer in the early 20th century, and he was imprisoned for years. And while he was in prison, he wrote this mystical text called the Rosamir, the Rose of the World.
Rosamira, yeah.
And it's Rosamira, and it's kind of like his Inferno, and he refers to Dante quite a bit in it. But it's this mystical, poetic attempt to sort of create a new mythology, a new spiritual mythology. And
I just ordered that one from a store yesterday after reading about it in your book.
Right. And one of the things it's very contemporary in the sense that he's sort of in this Sophionic tradition in these Russian mystical thinkers. Sophia, the wisdom, the feminine wisdom that in the Gnostic myth and in Kabbalah and others, somehow gets shorn off from the masculine god and is lost, and she falls to earth, and different sorts of myths and stories to account for that. And the whole idea, and that's what philosophy is about, the love of wisdom, the philosophia. So the philosophers are the lovers of Sophia, and Andreev is part of this. Sergei Bulgakov, he's a Silver Age one, but he's sort of back in being read, and he's another one who talks about, he's in this Sophionic tradition. And I did a different interview yesterday, and one of the points I made about him is that he had this transition from a Marxist into this more mystical thinker when he sort of started seeing nature as a who rather than a what. So it was this kind of personal encounter with this earth living, feminine, it's the Sophia and all that. I learned that there were, there's a resurgence in all this stuff that was, supposedly forbidden or was only kind of available on the underground. And then more contemporary things like, the native Slavic faith that's having a resurgence. Rodnovery, is it called?
Rodnovere, right.
Yeah, so this is a return, supposedly, to the pagan roots before Vladimir converted everybody. And
right. Well, I think this is very similar to like the Wicca stuff in the West.
Well, does it really connect to some ancient tradition? Right. Well, how are you going to know? But it works. So this is sort of like Ronald Hutton, where he says like it shouldn't be. One shouldn't see it as a negative thing that Wicca doesn't go back, as Margaret Mary thought, to ancient kinds of things. But religions are invented all the time, and so that may very well be the case. But I guess the other thing that I didn't know about until I did the research for this, and I mentioned to other people, and they aren't aware of it as well. But that doesn't mean much. But Anastasianism. These series of novels that Vladimir Megra? I don't know how you pronounce his last name.
I actually I asked a bunch of Russians again after reading your book. Everybody has a vague feeling that we've heard the word, but not not familiar.
Well, I must have been taken in by their own press releases.
Propaganda, the number of books called
millions and millions of copies sold around the world, and apparently there's a large readership in the States. And I make the joke that whether or not Russia is interfering with the American politics, elections, we can't say for sure, but they seem to be having a big effect in the New Age, area in the spirituality and that. So, I'm not on the ground, so I don't. And you mentioned Mamlev. I was able to get some stuff from different sources about relatively contemporary, say from the 60s or 70s on. And I can only name check was it Pelvin?
Pelevin, yeah, that's one of the formative writers for me.
God, who's the other one? I can't think of his name right now. Who wrote a book about the Oprichniki?
That's Sorokin. Yeah. Those two are often mentioned as there's a change in the, I guess, Russian reality, Russian politics. People say up until maybe mid 2000s, Pelevin was writing Russian reality. It
Okay.
was this absurd, strange, mind-bending, weird. It's kind of connected to Surkov's, way of looking at things,
Right.
where everything is illusion and everything is fools into something else. And then at some point, the mantle is given to Sorokin, who's written День опричника, the day of the опричник, and there's a sequel to that where he uses language more than anything, like a poetic kind of approach to language to describe this. Like, I think the way he approaches the day of the oppressing is like, if these people who are building, Putin and his clique who are building this new kind of totalitarian Russia with harkening back to the old Russia and mixing it with the Soviet myth and all that, if they wrote a real work of art and presented their view of the world in this, poetically rich way, how would that look? And he produces it, and then it's satire, but then when you read it, it's very, there's a strong sense of recognition with matching with the reality of today. And the further we go, more so. I mean, now in less than a month, there's going to be a vote on the changes to the constitution that Putin is making. And there he will, seems to be able to, rule until he's dead or close to that. He's like 16 more years is the opportunity.
I mean, do you think it's going to be a real vote, or is it just, a photo op?
That's not an expectation we have, no.
Sorry, I just had to ask, but
yeah. They're making these changes that are closer and closer to this view, this like weird mixture of Soviet and Tsarist kind of Russia that Sorokin wrote out very poetically.
Well, life imitates art. I mean, God, that's, we've known that for a long time. And, I mean, what do you want to say? I mean, Hitler was a failed painter. If only people bought his paintings, who knows what might have happened.
Have you heard the story about Lenin being a mushroom?
No, I don't know that. I know the book about Jesus being a mushroom, so he's in good company. But no, go ahead.
I'm trying to use it as a segue to like the post-Soviet confused relationship again of Russians to Russia. It's Sergei Kuryokhin. Have you heard about him?
No, off the top of my head, no.
He was an avant-garde pianist, a very good musician, and he hung around with Dugin a little bit in the 90s. There's definitely one video that I saw that is exemplary of their kind of playful approach to politics. In the 90s, there was this very bad like VHS recording that you can find on YouTube where Dugin and Kuryokhin appear on TV. It's like some late night show, and there was some kind of election coming up. And Dugin and Kuryokhin both wore masks of ancient Egyptian gods. And as these gods, they presented some kind of like a method for deciding who you're going to vote for. It's absolutely, it's theater, it's making fun of everything, but it's also trying to play a part in the political reality somehow. And the Lenin was a mushroom is kind of a similar thing. It's a satire parody situation that became more than I think it was supposed to be.
Well, isn't that the thing where the simulation becomes the real thing? Or like when is a simulated terrorist street art event turned into a real one?
Right.
Where's the dividing line? And I mean, that's the impression I get. What I talked about this more in Dark Star Rising than in the new book. But you mentioned Dugin. There is all this kind of street, kind of postmodern situationist sort of thing, but it is this whole thing about, well, you pretend to have a rally or something happening, and then people actually turn up. Well, is it a real thing anymore, or is it everybody just part of your conceptual art piece? And I guess this is the dangerous thing where art and politics come together, art and life. It goes back to this again. This is what in the pre-Bolshevik period, and what they picked up from the symbolists, because the symbolists had this whole idea about art supposed to be transformative. Right. Art has to have this transformative effect in some way. It can transform your life, and they're doing it in subtle ways. It's all suggestive and elusive, and things happening off stage. But that whole idea got picked up in the early days of agitprop, where they were trying to use symbolist techniques in the theater to get the message across.
Right.
And so, I mean, that kind of, because I mean, in a way, not to spin this out too tenuously, politics, it's not an art so much, but it does want to take some kind of stuff and turn it into something else. It does want to, society.
Right. There's magic to it.
Magic, and also attempt to change it and rearrange it, and it'll look better like that. So art's kind of doing, that on a different scale and and a different sort of value dimension. But you take the same idea, and again, I don't want to mention him across the water for me, who's running his whole reality TV show now. Everyone's watching it around the world. That's the thing. It's like you got somebody that's what they want to do. They want to create reality.
Right.
He doesn't. Right. He's not interested in politics. He's interested in creating reality.
Right. Right. And in
a way, I guess you can say Putin was doing that during the Surkov years. Is still doing it.
He's doing it still. It's just I think the genre has changed, but the project is still there. So the anecdote about the Lenin being a mushroom, it was.
Oh yeah, we didn't finish that. Yeah.
Right. It was like late. I think it was late 80s or maybe in 1990. So it was still the Soviet Union, but these like twilight years of more things are open and more stranger things are available. And Kuryokhin appeared on TV in a show of his friend, a journalist, Sholokhov. And what they did, it was like a mockumentary. It was they were laughing throughout. It was very obvious that it's a joke, or rather, it's very obvious for me now when I watch the recording. But apparently, it was not perceived by everybody at that time that way, because TV has been for so long this medium through which you get the official party line. And so they, what they were doing is they were making fun of these. TV shows, TV reports that started to appear where, like alternative history type stuff, like what really happened to that guy, not ancient aliens, but that kind of thing. And so they made this outlandish, Kuryokhin presented himself as some kind of a scholar and said that he is here to make the case for Lenin actually being a mushroom, and he, like, one of the pieces of proof that he showed is like a drawing of the armed car on which Lenin gave his famous speech, and next to it a drawing of a mushroom and the mycelium body on the ground. He's like, they look exactly the same. The structure is very similar. And so it's very, absurd, funny. It's half improvised. The theory, as he presented, is there's evidence of Lenin and other prominent Bolsheviks using hallucinogenic mushrooms, and what happens when you use these kinds of mushrooms for long enough, the personality of the mushroom replaces the personality of the host, and then eventually you become a mushroom in effect. A mushroom, and he said a radio wave, because mushrooms have been proven to be radio. It's completely, overblown, absurd thing. But the important thing about it is, A, it became kind of a meme that's still alive today. Like if you say Lenin grip, Lenin is a mushroom, people recognize the idea. B, the story goes, at the time, there was like an official... what do you call it? A request filed by the members of the Leningrad Communist Party to their leadership to, shed light on this. Was or was not Lenin a mushroom? We saw this on TV. What are we supposed to think about this? And there's an official response apparently where the woman who was given this response, she said, it's a quote. She said. Lenin was not a mushroom because a mammal cannot be a plant, which of course is suspicious because mushrooms are not plants. So it sounds like it's this absurd thing.
It leaves the door open.
Yeah, but the fact that this kind of like, of all the weird stuff that was happening at the time, this is the thing that got stuck in the culture. It's recognized. There are like other works of art that play with this meme, with this idea.
Yeah,
tells me that there's something to it, that it matches something within the culture, that the culture adopts it as a part of itself.
I can't comment on that, but that had I known that, I would have added that in to the book. That's remarkable. I mean, I said there was this book ages ago by John Allegro, who wrote about the Dead Sea Scrolls, the sacred mushroom and the cross. And I actually had a friend ages ago when I lived in Los Angeles, and I was working at this metaphysical bookshop, and he was a Jewish guy, but he had converted to Russian Orthodoxy. Actually, he was very interested in it. And I remember there was a used book section, and this book came in one day, Jesus, the Sacred Cross, and they said, "Hey, look, Neil, Jesus is a mushroom." And he just got completely enraged and inflamed and was banging the desk saying, "Jesus is not a mushroom." So, had I known Lenin, was supposed to have been one too, I would have said, "Well, it can't be that bad."
Santa Claus is supposed to be a mushroom too.
Oh yeah, that's there's
Everybody
no
was a
argument for that.
mushroom.
Is that the mushrooms have the red dots and all that? There's a bit.
Right.
Isn't that Terence McKenna country or something?
He definitely played with it. Yeah. Okay, so I'm curious about again how you see the modern Russia as it as it exists, and then the kind of political project of coming up with a new identity for it. Is it, I don't know what the question is. Is it convincing to you what Putin is trying to do? Is it the image that he is putting together? Is it?
Well, I mean, I think it has to be convincing to the Russian people more than anybody else. I mean, I would think, I'm not writing the, how should I say that? I'm objective, I'm trying to be in the sense of, what are you going to say? The tone carries whatever hint of approval or disapproval I have. It's not any direct attack or anything like that. As I say, it makes sense that, say, whenever it was 5 years or so ago or something, when Putin went into Crimea and Ukraine and all that, it makes sense in the history of Russia that he would do that, because Kiev was, the start of it all. And there's the whole idea of the statue of Vladimir the First that he has, just outside of the Kremlin, from what I understand. So it's kind of like, well, if you know the history, it makes sense. I'm not saying it should happen, or talk to the Crimeans and the Ukrainians and see what they have to say about it. But it's just like it makes sense. So a lot of, and I don't know how much Dugin actually, his influence or any of his ideas filtered in, but he too was talking about this sort of thing a few years in advance. It's in that book, I think, The Foundations of Geopolitics or something like that, if I'm mispronouncing
with Dugin, there was this moment that I found. I mean, I don't think Dugin is directly, responsible for much of the stuff like that he's influencing the situation directly. But I think his things that Dugin has been expressing, they find expression in other ways too. And, Dugin is somebody who Putin would be aware of. But then he draws on.
I'm not saying he's sort of running the show, but just sort of like, Chinese whispers. It gets there, and it seems to kind of.
There's a moment in that I saw some interview with Dugin some years later, after Crimea, and the question that was posed to him is like, there was a time, remember, right after or during the Crimean situation, where it seemed like you would say a thing, and then like a week later, it becomes reality, and it seemed like almost Putin is listening to you, and now it's changed. Like there's a divergence between what you're saying and what Putin is doing. How do you explain that? And Dugin, I don't think he like missed a beat. He said he had a whole theory about a solar Putin and a moon Putin, and there was the solar Putin that was doing things correctly at the time, and then the cycle changed, and then there's and which again kind of plays into, there's like this whole I don't think it's been expressed, or at least I haven't seen it expressed in like a word of fiction or anything. But there's this within the, as they say, folk mythology. There's a bunch of different expressions of these ideas about Putin's weird nature. There's the good Putin and the bad Putin. There's most of it again is jokes. There's like a poem about the good Putin being chained underneath the Kremlin, and it's the evil black Putin that's doing all the evil stuff here. And I think there's something to it, and I think that maybe again this idea that there is no Putin as an expression of a reality, a pretty straightforward reality of us not knowing what Putin actually thinks. Him playing different roles, him doing these weird like spectacles, saving the cranes or whatever. He always has some weird thing going on. But I think his relationship to all of these ideological things and philosophical ideas that he's using, I think it's very practical, and I think he's kind of open about it in some cases. I remember definitely in one instance, maybe it was in those Oliver Stone documentaries that he did, or interviews that Oliver Stone did with Putin, where he openly, like, the interviewer was asking him about the importance of Christianity, Russian Orthodoxy, and Putin, while embracing it wholeheartedly, Christianity and other traditional religions in Russia, he made it clear and explicit that there has to be something. Like, the Soviet ideology is not there anymore, and there can be a vacuum. There needs to be an ideology in the country. This is the next thing that we have, so we're doing this now.
Well, I mean, that's the impression I get. Again, is that trying to find something. Well, you said like the genres changed, so you entertained the people for that worked for quite some time. And then it seemed that kind of ran out of steam and exhausted its potential. And it's sort of, return to a former greatness or reemerge. I mean, it's the two opposites. Let's return to this former greatness, let's reclaim the near abroad and somehow, reunite the fallen empire. And then it's also, we are this new rising civilization that's completely new, in the 21st century. And we're not a backward cousin to the West, and it's the America. It's not the age of America anymore, and and so on and so on. So it seems to be kind of very different, but they're both similarly geared towards giving a new identity, giving a new narrative.
Right.
I mean, I think that's the thing, and I think he's right. In some way, and this, okay, I'm not really a political thinker. I just kind of strangely slipped into writing about politics because there's a lot of weird stuff happening in it these days. But I do think in the West, that's what the West has lost. The West has lost its narrative, at least the American democratic, free market, what I call in the book the me economy, because it doesn't have a narrative anymore. The narrative is about you could have anything you want, have it your way, with Burger King, whatever it is, burgers are. And so it's all about how can I rearrange the world around me to suit me, how I want it to be, and whatever that might be, whatever, and this liberating at first and wonderful freedom, but then it gets amorphous and there's no boundaries anymore, and there's no longer anything to liberate yourself from. And I'm not saying there aren't people that need to be liberated. I'm talking about, the majority of well-off, people that are live in the standard of living that no one's actually ever been able to experience before, and all that. And it seems to have, lost its way. It seems to be drifting and not knowing where to go, and all that. And I think it's true. I think you do need some kind of narrative. It doesn't have to be something that's imposed on you. It could be something that arises out of the people, or something that you share, so a set of beliefs and all that. But Whether what Putin is doing is the right thing to do, or it's not so much condoning it as recognizing that, well, it makes sense, and it is something that's sort of needed, I would think, to keep a country going. I mean, but obviously, I mean, one of the well, you must have seen some of these funny videos that were made after Trump did the Make America Great or America First kind of thing, and then you had, I don't know, the Netherlands, can we be number two? And, so lots of countries have a great sense of humor and all that, and so they have their own story, but it doesn't have to be this
Right.
macho hero kind of one. But I think when you were a power that was one of the the other great superpower, and then you've lost that position, to sort of regain something like that, I'm not surprised.
Yeah, there's absolutely, as they say, there's a lot of anxiety among just Russians about that. Like, who are we? Is there, before your book came out, I remember talking to my brother and just mentioning that I'm looking forward to the book coming out and then the opportunity to speak to you. And we only had the title and the basic premise, outlined in the editor's description to go on. And it was a funny thing. Before that, I saw him. We did this thing, Ask a Russian, on Non-Zero newsletter page, where people ask questions, and I would try to answer them about Russia. And my brother came into that comment section, and he kept doing the things that you write about in the book, that as a part of the character. People were asking particular political questions oftentimes, should the Baltic states be concerned about Russian aggression? And then my brother would show up and go, I don't think metaphysically Russia is an aggressor. And then he would write these long things about the idea of Russia as it actually is, as opposed to what is expressed in the real world and all of that stuff. And I was like, you're not helping. This is... the image is getting worse. And yet then we're sitting at this bar, and I mentioned your book. And again, we didn't really know what the book was going to be about, really, except for, there's the return of the Holy Russia. And he kind of sighed and was like, do you think there's anything worthwhile in modern Russia? Is there any idea to even, investigate and explore? Because it seems to me it's just a bunch of people trying to steal shit. And it's that, in him, and I brought it up to him, you spoiled my common situation by talking about eternal Russia when people were asking about, are you going to invade a country or not? And now you're saying there's none of this, ideal, eternal anything here. And he said, yeah, when I speak to foreigners, I feel like, when a Shanka hat emerges on and I start sounding like Putin or somebody. But in his example, or the example of him, is characteristic of this, we need something. There used to be an identity. Even, when the Americans started to blame Russia or part of Americans, right? Russia suddenly became this boogeyman that's responsible for everything bad that's happening in America for some of them. I saw in some Russians simultaneously, they would scoff at it. They would say it's ridiculous. But then there was a little bit of warmth of they're noticing us. At least we're in the story. They're talking about us. At least we're not completely peripheral as we've been for a little while. So I don't know if Putin's going to be successful with his thing. I mean, just now, the pandemic led to a cancellation or postponing of the Victory Day parade for the Second World War. And I was just seeing, Putin's biggest critic, Navalny, talking about, so now they're going to do this parade a week before they do the parade on a Wednesday at the end of June, and there's a week of voting on these changes into the Constitution, and then another day off at the end of that. And when Putin said that there's going to be a parade, he talked with such pride, we're gonna do, we must do this very important thing, do the parade. And then what I heard from Navalny and what I hear from Russians ordinarily nobody cares about the parade. Nobody needs the parade. There are other concerns. I mean, it's a thing on TV you can watch. It's fun. You can see a tank go by, but nobody really cares. But he presents it, and I think for him, like, these are the tools that he works with. He needs to create these realities, and I think he does think that the parade is essential to carry on this project of establishing some kind of an identity.
I mean, wasn't it Belarus who had it anyway?
Belarus didn't do anything about the pandemic at all. Lukashenko was
but there's, at least it was on the news here that they had that the May Day or the parade you're talking about that was postponed. They went ahead and did it anyway, and it was just huge. At least what I saw on the news, it was just a huge kind of thing. And I think it was for similar reasons. I don't remember the president or whatever his name, but there was some election coming up, and so it was I guess it instills some kind of, patriotism. I mean, if you don't, I think in some ways, if you don't have that, people just start thinking about like day-to-day things. They're thinking about them anyway, but they just start thinking about day-to-day things. How do I pay these? How do I deal with this? Why doesn't this work? And all that kind of stuff. And then that's trouble, because then no parade is going to, fix that. And I guess in the States, it's the same kind of thing, these rallies and these huge kind of things. And, I mean, can I just ask off message? Seeing what's happening in the States, I mean, what do you think? How does it translate over there? What does it sound like? All the chaos that's going on there now, and it's just horrific.
Yeah, I mean, I'm watching it. It looks very intense, and looks also very American. In like there's a part of it there's like
special effects, right?
It's all very theatrical and movie-like, and there's like a lot of gestures, and everybody's participating in everything in different ways. Like there are layers and kind of turns to it. There's the looting, there's the like protesters who fix up the things that were broken by other protesters. There's I think that's one of the with my girlfriend, again, we've been watching what's happening in America, and then we consume American pop culture and media and all that. And a thing that keeps coming up is one of the differences between Russia today, at least certainly in our lifetime, and in America is you mentioned Gumilev in your book. He has this passionarity term. There's a vital force. In America, it seems very alive. Everybody's fighting everybody else. There is like heroes appearing. There's new images that just emerge. Like even before these riots, like the pandemic, I remember watching it, and there are people with guns in Michigan or wherever saying that country needs to be opened up. Then on the other hand, there are nurses showing up to a protest to protest the protest, and the nurse becomes this image of a hero at the front lines fighting. And meanwhile in Russia, we have the pandemic too, but we just kind of go like, whatever the authorities make particular decisions, something is enacted, and then people are forced to go about it, but nobody's trying to influence the situation. And in America, it seems like everybody's trying to influence in everything.
Well, I mean, it's what do you want to say? Divisive isn't even coming close anymore. It's completely fragmenting and fracturing. And I mean, well, it's I don't want to make I was going to say I don't want to make generalizations, but I make them all the time. But there seems something. The people who have the guns are the ones who don't want to stay in lockdown, and they're also the ones now. If God forbid something does happen and does turn into something larger, then I mean, I've seen uprising on some tweets, but it's protest and riot isn't quite an uprising yet.
Right.
Not that I want it to be, but if that happened, it's all these other people that have the guns, really, and it's no, I can't even. It's so saddening to me to watch it happen, and it's but it is this. I can't believe these pictures of the police. They're so.
Yeah.
People say they're like RoboCop. I mean, they're just armed to the teeth and protected to the teeth, and you just have
Yeah, the
yeah,
police
there's all
is...
I mean, sadly, it's what do you want to say? It's a legitimate protest against something that was absolutely horrible, should never have happened. The people involved should have been arrested immediately. And then that gets, there's legitimate and understandable anger, and then there's people who hijack it, for a variety of different reasons to make it into something else. And then there's this response, not from all the police, from, many of them, that is really, disproportionate. And then you have the man who's supposed to be guiding, the nation should be into some kind of, peace, or at least, a truce or something. He's talking about dominating and all of this, and thousands and thousands of heavily armed soldiers. And it's just, I'm here in sleepy London town, it's like, and I'm watching it on TV and I'm thinking, my God, what is happening over there?
So it looks like a movie completely.
Went off topic, but it was, well, that's what I mean. It was sort of like his reality TV show. And by saying that, I'm not trying to diminish, the real heart of it, which was a real protest, but then it gets taken over by this sort of thing. And it seems in some way, it's like an opportunity for him to show, I'm tough and I'm not going to, take this kind of thing.
So I had a thought just now to tie this all together. So we've talked about the Russian struggles with the Russian identity, which is always like, there's a project of becoming the Russia that you're thinking about, and we're never quite there. And I was just talking to an American friend about this, about the similarities and differences between American and Russian relationship to the idea of, respectively, America and Russia.
Right.
And the similarity is maybe that it's a project, like there's an idea of what the country is, and you're trying to make it that, or uphold it. And the difference, or one of the differences that came up in this conversation with my American friend, is that I said that I don't know if it's me or my generation of Russians, but it's definitely, tied to me being born right before the collapse of the Soviet Union. So I was growing up during this like ideologically chaotic, vacuous kind of time. And I think that my anxiety about the Russian identity, or what Russia is lessened compared to like my parents' generation, who went through the 90s, another collapse of a version of what is going on here. Because to me, it's like, looking back at the history, I see iterations, and I know that Russia persists even after a particular version of it dies. So it's like you had the Russian Empire, that's gone. In its place was supposed to be a complete antithesis to it, and that lasted for 70 years, and then that was gone. And the 90s were this like tumultuous time where it was not clear. Now Putin is building one thing. I sort of expect it to not, I hope to live longer than Putin's version of Russia. And I kind of feel, I don't feel very nervous about this idea of Russia, of what I think Russia is, because that thing keeps, existing even after particular versions of it, this state or that state or regime die. And this friend of mine who's American said, I think that's very different for Americans, because they think if we lose what we are, or what we think we are, on all of the sides that are involved in these conflicts, right? So for one, there's this, whatever, it's a white country or Anglo something country, the Western, heritage or whatever. And on the other hand, there's the people who believe in what's written in the Bill of Rights and the equality and all that. But for all of them, there's something big at stake. And if they don't come to a shared identity, they don't come to a consensus, or one of them doesn't win, if the country isn't what they think it is or is supposed to be, then what is it? What's going to come after that? Does that make sense to you?
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, I think America, it has been for a while. I mean, but it's going through an identity crisis now. And it's also, again, especially it's America first kind of thing, where we're no longer the policemen, or we're no longer going to solve the problems of the world. We're like, well, what does it mean now anymore to be American? Because that was the thing. America was supposed to be the good guys, the land of the free, the leader of the free world, and all of that. And whether it should still be that or not is a different question. But when that is kind of gone in a way, or put it this way, it's not gone, but it's not as secure and unquestioned as it was before. And there's some people who are absolutely, we don't need to do that. We can still be a power in the world, but we don't need to do all the stuff we're trying to do. And there's others saying, no, we're America, we're great. The rest of the world has to respect us, and all this kind of thing. And they want to regain this, prior sense of, I guess, the late 1950s, early 60s sense of America in some way, the real leader of the free world kind of thing. And then there's all the stuff that comes out that says, well, actually, it wasn't quite like that. Absolutely. It's, we all have feet of clay and all of that. And I would say now, sadly, I don't want to go back to it again, but just when I see comments of people on Twitter from different parts of the world, it is this kind of thing like, well, is this America? Now you basically, you condemn all this sort of stuff in other parts of the world, but what's happening there? So no, I think there's a profound identity crisis going on there, and it is leading to these kinds of schisms and these kind of battles. There was the people who believed in the melting pot. That was the whole idea. When my parents, born in the 20s and in the 30s, I remember asking them about their background, because they came from their family back to European roots. Mm-hmm. Actually, on one side of my father's family, he said from Ukraine. I never found out exactly where, Galicia or somewhere like that. In any case, but it was sort of like, well, we don't know that because that's the old world. We're Americans. They were born in America, but their parents, they said, no, we've got rid of the old world. We're Americans now. We all kind of, part of this thing together. And that was the idea I grew up with in the 60s and all that. And it's a small world after all. And, we're all different, but we all get together and all that. You had the euphemism of the salad bowl, but, it's even getting worse than that now. It is this fracturing into all you said, this kind of war of all against all, that seems to be certainly happening. And so, yeah, I'm just kind of seeing it, from my safe perch here in London, seeing it kind of, what do you want to kind of like separate and congeal into, different kinds of things, like a kind of pudding or, I don't know, some kind of liquid sort of thing you have. And then if you leave it too long, bits of it will congeal into other bits. And it's just, and then they're all kind of fighting each other. So, I don't know. I don't have any words of wisdom to offer to make it any better, but I certainly do think America is going through an identity crisis. And I lived here in London for 25 years. I'm not a Brit.
I was about to ask, how do you feel as a part of some cultural narrative? Are you European, American?
Well,
what's going on?
I'm an American who loved Europe. I grew up as an Anglophile and a Europhile. So not that I didn't like America, but I'm a late boomer, born in 55, grew up during the 60s. What I see now is very much, what was happening back in 68. Although this seems to me on a bigger scale. But I'm unavoidably American. I can't get rid of that, I'm not consciously tried to be. I'm not a Brit. I'm a Londoner in the way that people who live in New York, from other places turn out to be New Yorkers. So I become a Londoner and all that. So this cosmopolitan kind of thing. But no, I certainly have this narrative where the great books narrative or the great teachers narrative, this kind of an intellectual, cultural, imaginative heritage, which is, shared. It's mostly English language for me, but a lot of the great writers I love from Germany, from Russia as well. It's all in translation. But so I feel part of that, that life of the mind, and that's cosmopolitan. It's international. It's up above, the sort of neuroses of politics and all that, or one would like it to be. So that's how I feel. You know, I want to be part of that conversation. You know, with
right.
I want to sit in on that great conversation that's been going on for several hundred years with all these different thinkers and writers and all that, and try to get some sense of where things are going. And I mean, I tend to say now that the future's caught up to us, because it's sort of like this thing that was supposed to be way out there ahead of us, but now, we find ourselves here very, very more quickly than we thought we were going to arrive, and we're not quite ready for it. So we're in the midst of history happening now, you know, ladies and gentlemen. You know, it's was it Napoleon who pointed that out? So it's something along those lines now.
All right. Well, that's a note to end on. We are in the midst of history happening now. Yeah. This pandemic too. My sense is it condensed the time so much. So many things are happening, quicker.
Absolutely. I mean, in Russian history, it's the time of troubles, I guess, before the Romanovs, and Boris Godunov's time and all that. But the 20th century historian Arnold Toynbee, he took that kind of phrase and applied it to different civilizations. He's saying civilizations go through this challenge and response kind of cycle. And they reach the time and they have their time of troubles and they have to find a way to respond to it. And he has what I call the Goldilocks theory of history. I don't know if you know the Goldilocks fairy tale.
Right, the astronomical.
But, so the thing is for Toynbee, if the challenge is too great, then the civilization is smashed by it. If it's not great enough, it overcomes it too easily, becomes complacent and goes through a decline. But if it's just right, just as like Goldilocks, this porridge is too hot, this is too cold, this is just right. So if the challenge is just right, then the culture and civilization is able to generate the creative energy to overcome the immediate challenge, but also to push itself into, the next stage. So let's just hope that's what's happening now.
I was reading a thing on like Russian like analysts and writers, journalists responding to the pandemic and all the issues connected to it, the economic crisis that would come with it. And a bunch of them pointed out that Russian history goes through like the Brezhnev's year where nothing is happening for a couple of decades and it's just stale and there's no growth. And then something really bad happens, and then only then the nation somehow pulls together, or the culture pulls together and comes up with some, or the 20s, the Civil War. So there's a hope that this challenge now is going to produce some kind of creative outburst too, but we'll see.
We'll see. We certainly will, and that's always the hope. So,
well, thank you so much for the conversation and the book. I'm still reading it and enjoying it thoroughly.
Well, my pleasure, and thanks for giving me a chance to talk about it. So let's stay in touch. До свидания.
До свидания.